BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the program and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and this edition comes from the lecture theatre of the Institution of Electrical Engineers in London. And those taking part in the programme are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. And here's round one to test their vocabularies. For 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of the following words. We begin with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is an icosahedron?
Icosy, a thing with 20 sides.
What particular kind of thing with 20 sides?
Well, a flat thing.
That'd be rather hard.
Icosy is 20.
Yes. 20,
it's a figure.
Yes.
A geometrical figure with 20 sides.
That's good enough. What I wanted was...
Jolly good.
It's a solid. The point is, it's a solid contained within 20 plane faces, which is a rather nice thought. And a regular icosahedron is contained by 20 equilateral triangles. So it is a thing of a certain solidity.
It can't be sort of 10 football games.
No. Come on. Now, Denis Norden. Denis, what's the meaning of Gunter? G-U-N-T-E-R.
A little stir among this technical audience here. Gunter is a technical term used in Swiss roll making. A Gunter is a very, very small Swiss gentleman who crawls through a concentric Swiss roll dragging a trail of raspberry jam.
I'm going to give you one for sheer effrontery.
It's technical.
Gunter or Gunter's scale is a flat 2-foot rule marked with scales on the one side and logarithms on the other, used for solving problems in surveying or in navigation. But there was a thing called Gunter's chain, which was 66 foot long, which you used in surveying. Now, Anne Scott James, what is the Heaviside layer?
Why, I should think it's a big man on top of his wife. Well, now, this is a technical term frequently used in electronics, Jack.
It's a technical term, all right?
And it's something to do with wireless telegraphy
Yes.
or moon escape.
It's one of the layers of the atmosphere.
I think I give you 1.5. It's the layer of the atmosphere which reflects radio waves back and so causes them roughly to follow the contour of the Earth, named after Oliver Heaviside, who was a famous British physicist. 1.5.
Electrodynamic chicken.
All right, Frank, your turn. Frank, what is an interferometer?
Ah! It's a device, quite an old thing, Jack.
Yes?
And it's like a chastity belt devoted to detection rather than prevention.
One mark.
Which I accept.
I think the term was first used in 1899. Instrument for measuring the length of light waves by means of interference phenomena. Don't ask me about that, though I have got it down. I do roughly know what it means. 1 out of 2. Well, before we begin the next round, I'm going to read out a quotation for each team to write down, and the 2 women members will do well to study those quotations, because at the end of the program, I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms?" And Anne Scott James and Denis, here's yours. "The buyer needs 100 eyes. And then in the last round, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Well, round 2 is a round of inside-out definitions. What I do is to give the definition first of all. I want members of the teams to tell me who or what the definition refers to. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, a marriage system under which a man has all his wives at the same time.
Polygamy.
Yeah, 2 marks. Polygamy is the answer.
Insanity.
Denis Norden, a simple garment carrying the implicit promise that it will not long stay in place.
A woman's slip. Yeah, we've got a lot of scientists here. What is the scientific reason why a woman's slip sags down but a man's shirt always rides up? Yes, it's a hula skirt.
That wouldn't be a bad one. I'll give you that. It's a sarong, but a hula skirt will do. 2. Anne Scott James, stealing a ride on someone else's train of thought.
Oh, to plagiarise.
Yes, that's it. 2 marks, well done. And Frank Muir, a man who marries his secretary thinking he will continue to dictate to her.
Optimist.
Optimist will do. 2 marks. The next round is about legends in Greek mythology, 2 marks each time. Dilys Powell, how was the goddess Athene born?
Well, it was rather an unusual birth. It was, must have been very uncomfortable for everybody concerned. I think she was dragged from a bit of her father.
Yes. Her father, Zeus, had swallowed his pregnant wife, who was called Metis, because he was afraid that she would produce
I said it was an unusual birth.
He was afraid she'd produce a boy who was too strong for him, and he developed a terrible headache. And so
I should hope so.
Hephaestus split his skull with an axe, and out sprang Athene, fully armed, eternally virgin, and always being spoiled by Zeus. Denis Norden, what was the punishment of Prometheus, and what was he punished for?
He was bound because there's another book called Prometheus Unbound. So obviously he was bound, and he had an eagle come at regular intervals on the hour and peck his liver.
Yes.
It's presumably the origin of chopped liver, but his crime... I always remember a schoolboy howler, which was that fire was invented by the Greek god Promiscuous. And he was punished for inventing fire because people thought, oh, it'll never catch on, it's just a novelty. It won't beat people huddling together.
2 marks it is. He stole fire from the gods. Zeus was in a pet and had held it back from mankind. And there were other grievances Zeus had too. And he was chained to this rock on the Caucasus.
Yes, it's a kind of cooling off period.
Right. His liver was eaten every day and it grew again every night. It must have been very uncomfortable. Anne Scott James, how did Zeus manage to visit Danae?
No, he visited people in such extraordinary shapes.
Yeah.
I think he visited Danae in the form of a golden shower, didn't he?
He did. Absolutely right. Danae's father had been warned that she would bear a son who'd kill him, and so locked her away in a bronze chamber or tower. And Zeus, very unfairly, changed himself into this shower of gold and got to Danae fairly easily. Afterwards, Perseus was born, and after many adventures, he accidentally killed his grandpa by hitting him on the side of the head with a discus. Frank Muir, what was the judgment of Paris, and who were the contestants?
There was all the wedding guests were there, weren't they? And there's always one lady in a hat who messes things up, and she was the goddess of discord, wasn't she?
Yeah.
And she said an apple. She flung an apple in and said, give this to the prettiest of 3 women. The sexy one was Venus,
Yes.
Diana and Juno.
Hello, yes. That's a masterly summary, Frank. Paris, son of King Priam of Troy, was asked to judge, and he did. Chose the most beautiful of mortal women, and so came Helen of Troy and the Trojan War. In this round, I want to know by whom and of whom these words were said or written. 2 marks for correct answers. Dilys Powell, I woke one morning and found myself famous.
Byron.
After the publication.
Why was he famous?
He'd just written, was it Child Hell?
Yes,
Child Hell.
Just written Child Hell.
jolly good.
It was a bestseller.
I awoke famous.
It's Byron, speaking about Byron. The poem Child Harold was an instantaneous success, and he recorded this in his memoranda. 2 marks. Denis Norden, let the boy win his spurs.
Yes, Black Prince, that was.
Yes.
It's one of those things you remember.
Yes.
And the Battle of Cressy springs up from the card index.
And who is speaking?
His dad.
Okay, that'll do.
Oh, I haven't been near that part of the world for so many years.
I bet it wasn't the horse.
It is Edward III consenting to his son, the Black Prince, fighting in the Battle of Cressy in 1345. And Scott James, that sheep worry of Europe.
Is it 18th century?
Beginning of the 19th century.
I can only think of Napoleon.
You're thinking absolutely right.
But I did ask.
Do you know who wrote this? He was a poet laureate. No mind. No. 1.5. It's Robert Bridges, who was poet laureate at one time, writing about Napoleon in his work called Wintry Delights. Now, Frank Muir, Madam, I may not call you. Mistress, I am ashamed to call you. And so I know not what to call you. But howsoever, I thank you.
Yes, this is a royal thing.
Yes.
It was one of those things, there was a story that a titled gentleman who had a doctor wife said to the Duke of Edinburgh, I find it awfully difficult to know how to introduce my wife. And the Duke said, yes, I know the problem. This was Queen Elizabeth I. And, now what did she say? Who did she say it about? Mary Queen of Scots.
No. Anyway, you've got most of it right. 1.5 again. Queen Elizabeth I was just meeting the wife of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and she was definitely not amused by married clergy. And it is a rather splendid example of royal arrogance as a greeting. Now we come to the last round, and I go back to the 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms?
The first line of a poem by Keats.
Yes.
It's called La Belle Dame sans Merci.
2 marks straight away.
And it ailed him like mad.
And Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of yours, which was the buyer needs 100 eyes?
Well, I actually think it comes from a country where bargaining means a great deal. I think it's an old Arabian proverb. Proverb.
2 marks it is. Well, now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their improbable explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir and his quotation, oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms?
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I note that it is a tradition at your annual meetings for some members to give a speech and other members to read a paper. Sometimes members read a paper during the speech, but tonight, for my dissertation, if I may, I want to talk about history in relation to electricity. I don't think you are taught enough of the real history of the people who started electricity on its way towards the modern world. You get taught about James Watt. You get taught that he formulated this measurement of electrical force. You may even, if it's a good book of history, be taught that he worked when a young man with Matthew Boulton at the Soho Engineering Works, Birmingham. You may even be told that he invented other things, but you are not told that what he invented before he worked for Matthew Boulton was an oil which he rubbed on babies in order to stop them scratching themselves. And yet, Mr. President, had James Watt not invented that oil for rubbing on babies, he would not have been engaged by Matthew Boulton. You see, Matthew Boulton had a collection of bright young thinkers, young scientists who wouldn't accept the old principles. They had questing, searching minds. He used to call them his think pool. Or his skeptic tank. Of this group of young questing minds, James Watt was the leading figure. And one day he said, I've invented something electrical. He said, I've named it after myself. It's a Watt. So Boulton said, well, it's rather small, isn't it? So Watt said, well, I don't know, I suppose you could put 100 of them in a sort of glass globe and set fire to it, and you'd have a 100-watt lamp. So Boulton said, no, I don't think we'll proceed with that. I don't think that's interesting at all. It's too small. So, well, you know the history. 5 years later, Watt came and said, look at this. They all said, oh, magnificent. Oh, enormous. He said, this is really big, 1,000 times more powerful. This will make pop-up toasters. This will make possible intercity railway. The electric kettle. And Boulton said, may I just touch it? He said, no, don't touch that with a wet thumb. And psst, you're finished. I call it the kilowatt. That was, of course, the beginning of the real electric power. But in that 5 years between the discovery of the watt and the kilowatt, what the history books don't tell you is, in fact, Watt was nearly sacked because the women in the Soho works at Birmingham wore in those days flannel nighties. And these flannel nighties gave them a very itchy tum. And finally they didn't turn up for work, and 80% of his labour force was off work. And one day, Matthew Boulton was striding his study, and his wife said to him impishly, oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? He said, well, I'll have to lay off that fellow Watt. He's no good in working on the experiment. I'll have to lay him off. Just a minute, my dear. He said, what was that thing you just said? And I said, oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? He said, that's the answer. Of course. That oil he bought when he first applied for the job. And he then said a line, and because of that line, not only do we now have electricity, but James Watt had the most agreeable part-time job that any electrical engineer has ever had. And the line he said was the line that he thought that she'd said, which was, oh, what can oil the nighty tums?
Never has so much twisted electrical history been pushed into so short a space. And now we go on to Denis Norden, and if you remember, his quotation was, the buyer needs 100 eyes.
I saw an interesting headline in a newspaper recently. Man hit by train, critical. Well, I should think he would be. Now, I quote that headline because earlier today I was shown round the exhibits, and quite frankly the whole thing left me feeling rather like the man who encountered the train. You see, the exhibition features such items as a solid-state microwave Doppler system, a model telephone exchange employing reed relays as the speech path switching elements, a light-hearted demonstration of the effects of capacitance, and a method of exciting metal plates. Yes, I was at a loss about that last item of technology as well. So I speak to you FIEEs today as one who finds his life infested with electrical appliances, all of which are smarter than he is, and which seem to exist only to bamboozle and bankrupt him. An electric carving knife that makes you feel like a nervous Jack the Ripper. Electric hair dryers that bring a whole new horror to the phrase blowing one's top. With one of my electrical appliances, there was a pamphlet that promised a 5-year, twice-your-money-back guarantee if it burns your toast. Big deal. It's a washing machine. So, what I am pleading to you technologists in the audience is, please, gang, don't spend those funds messing about with photon correlation spectrometers or crossbar gas discharge arrays. Because for us electrical ignoramuses, there are much more fundamental questions we'd like to know the answers to. Electrical questions. For example, why is it the moment you switch out the electric light in a child's bedroom, he immediately gets thirsty? Why is it you people who did that model telephone exchange, why aren't wrong numbers ever engaged? And finally, and from the heart, a final one, for you, these inventors, why can't you invent a gadget so that politicians on TV know when you've turned the sound down? All right. Anyone who purchases an electric appliance today has need of as many institutions of electrical engineering as he can rally. Or as George Herbert put it, in the 17th century, the buyer needs 100 IEEs.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Denis Norden wins the contest of the two stories, and he and Anne Scott James, by a very narrow margin, also win the entire contest. And that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The program was devised by Tony Schreien and Edward J. Mason, and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are M. Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. And here's round one to test their respective vocabularies. For 2 marks, I want to know the meaning of these words. And we begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is a martello? M-A-R-T-E-L-L-O. Martello.
It sounds like a kind of cocktail, alternatively. I think, in fact, it's a kind of tower.
What kind of tower?
A kind of defensive tower, of which there are 5 or 6 or a dozen or so on the southeast, on Kent, southeast coast.
When did they happen?
They were put up in fear of a Napoleonic invasion.
Absolutely right. Martello, a small circular fort, as Anne quite rightly said, usually on the south and southeast side of the coast, to stop a hostile landing by Napoleon and his chaps. But it is a corruption of a cape in Corsica, Cape Mortilla, where there was a tower of this kind, which was captured by the English fleet in the Napoleonic Wars in 1794. 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is the meaning of trope? T-R-O-P-E.
It's a musical term, and it means a twiddly bit.
Yes, that's one of the meanings. There is a literary meaning, which you may also know, Frank. I mean, I'll give you a mark.
It's a kind of figure of speech, metaphor.
Quite right. 2 marks. It's
twiddly bit.
It's a twiddly bit. Figurative use of a word, metaphorically or ironically. And in the Western Church, it was a phrase or a verse introduced as an embellishment into part of the text of the Mass, and it comes from a Greek word meaning a turn. Dilys Powell, what's the meaning of stithy? S-T-I-T-H-Y, stithy.
Well, it's something which stithers up or stitches up.
That doesn't help me much so far.
No?
No.
Needle.
Can we change any of the consonants?
Yes, you could change one of the consonants with great profit.
The second one?
Yes.
Change the second one, the smithy.
Yes, that'll help quite a lot.
T to M.
Yes, and what would that mean?
Would mean a smithy.
All right, so I'll give you a mark. It originally meant stithy, an anvil, and hence a smithy or a forge, and it comes from a German word meaning just to stand. Shakespeare in Hamlet says, "My imaginations are as foul as Vulcan's stithy," which means the way he forged either nasty thoughts or nasty things, I haven't said which. Denis Norden, what does copula mean?
Copula. Let me put it in verse. I wouldn't dare define a copula, but in the right time and place it's extremely popular. It looks Latin.
Yes?
As far as I'm going to go.
Is it a link of any sort?
That's right.
Oh.
That's what I wanted. It's that which connects the subject and the predicate. And if I say, you are drunk, then the "are" is the copula between you and drunk. It's also in anatomy, a connection between bone and cartilage ligament. In music, it's a short transitional or connecting passage. Before we begin the next round, I shall read out a quotation for each team to write down, and the 2 women members will do well to study those quotations, because at the end I shall ask them where the quotations come from. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, "Honesty is the best policy." And Dilys Powell and Frank, yours is a rather longer one. "Full-blown poppies, overcharged with rain, decline the head and drooping kiss the plain."
And drooping. Kiss the... Do carry on, I'll join you in a minute.
It's about time.
Go.
All right. And in the last round, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Well, now we have a round of in-words. I want to know what the phrase means, and 2 marks again. Anne Scott James, in flagranti delicto.
Means you're absolutely caught in the act.
Yes. In the act of committing an offence, caught red-handed, while the offence is flagrant, is what it means in Latin. 2 marks. Frank Muir, in partibus. P-A-R-T-I-B-U-S. In partibus.
It's a North Country expression, really. It means it means I'll be going in the coach with the other lads. I must confess I didn't take Latin. I had a headache.
Your wife would know this straight away.
Oh, it's a part of the Catholic Mass.
Yeah? No, it's not quite, but it's a Catholic expression, yes.
I must say I've heard it.
Yes.
In partibus.
All right, I'm going to give you half a mark.
With the others.
Give you half a mark. It's short for impartibus infidelium. It means in the regions of infidels. And it's usually applied to a Roman Catholic bishop in a country whose title comes from some old diocese which has fallen away from the Christian faith and gone heathen. That's impartibus. Dilys Powell, in puris naturalibus.
Simple nature.
Yes, I want to know what you look like when you're like this, in puris.
Oh, naked.
Yes. It means starco. You can swim or walk or do anything else appropriate without any clothes on at all. And this is in puris naturalibus. Denis Norden, in petto. P-T-T-O. In petto.
Petto. Petto wouldn't be just about 10 minutes before in flagrante delicto. Before you take your cardigan off. You know. I don't know, there's no petum, is it? I don't, the Latin doesn't suggest...
No, it's
any...
Italian.
Does it mean in short?
No,
it doesn't.
Petto. Would it be little? Yes, there's...
No, I know this is... it ought to, but it doesn't.
Oh, well, I don't do things that
You see,
ought to,
this
but-
is Italian,
It's
isn't it?
Italian, yes.
It means in the coop, at home, in the field, in the... Come on, think of another word for it.
No, make
Pesto.
Something to do with a crime.
No,
sin.
It's a temporal thing, not
Not
place,
moral.
not place, not time rather than place.
Don't know.
Don't think you're going to get it.
No, not a wire.
It means something kept back or held in reserve, undisclosed. Cardinals in petto were those who were just about to be elected cardinals, but the public didn't know yet who they were.
Good,
and it
yeah.
comes from the Latin in pectore, which means in the breast, or something still secret. Well, now we have a round about origins and derivations of words or phrases. I want to know first what the present meaning is, and then how the word or phrase originated. 2 marks again. Scott James, etiquette.
It means a system or standards of polite behaviour.
Yes. And
Is it
originally?
anything to do with riding?
No.
It's a ticket, isn't it? It's a ticket.
Yeah.
So would it mean your entry form into a smart into a house with owned by
yes.
an earl and a countess? for
You're getting
instance?
very close indeed, yes. Put it up a bit, put the ante up
Ah,
slightly.
yes, it would be your ticket into the royal household, methinks. No?
I think I'll give you 2. It isn't absolutely dead right, but it's near enough. It now means the conventional rules of behaviour in polite society, or the unwritten code governing members of some professions, or the ceremonial of a court. But it used to be a ticket or a card on which the regulations and directions to be observed by those who attended court were written out. Now, Frank Muir, Grub Street.
Grub Street was a street in Moorfields, which, when Shakespeare was an actor, was inhabited by people who made arrows and bows. It then descended rather rapidly, becoming a street of gaming and dice. And then, in the early 17th century, it descended even further, to becoming a place where writers of brief histories and
Well done.
dictionaries and temporary verse
Well done.
resided. It was in fact the place where hack writers lived. But hack writers didn't exist till the 17th century, till the civil wars, and only really prospered at in the time of Charles II. In the 19th century, the name was changed to Milton Street, and it now was knocked down when the Barbican was built.
If you don't know, say you don't.
totally impossible for me to improve on that, and 2 marks straight away. Now, Dilys Powell, the phrase, "you are chaffing me."
Chaffing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it means you're sort of making fun of me, teasing me.
How does it come to mean that?
Chaffing. Anything to do with chaff?
Yes, it's something very simple and literal.
Oh. Chaff is the kind of what's left when you winnow the wheat.
Yes.
So you're sort of throwing me away lightly.
No, it isn't. No, you haven't got the exact connotation. It means you're making fun of me in a light-hearted sort of way. But it probably comes from an old custom which used to exist in the Midlands, in Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire. If a husband was supposed to be ill-treating his wife, neighbours would then empty a sack of chaff at his door to signify that thrashing was done within the house. So that it...
Don't believe it.
Nonsense.
That's the most plausible explanation I can give you. Denis Norden, what is a one-eyed steak?
Well, where I was born, in Mayor Street, Hackney, that's what we used to call a kipper.
Absolutely dead right, and 2 marks straight away.
They've got 2 eyes.
I know, but that's what they used to be
Kipper's
called.
like
In those days, I never used to worry about origins and derivations, actually.
The kipper's like an opened-out dispatch rider's jerkin. And it's got on the other side, but
It's actually come to be used later as part of the last chapter of detective stories, where the detective would say, "All the others I suspected, but you're the one-eyed stake my life."
Wish I could give you a bonus, but I won't. Well, now we come to the last round, and I go back to the 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. 2 marks, and Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation? "Honesty is the best policy."
Well, I just think it's a proverb.
It became one, certainly. But it did have
It had an older...
It had a chap who said it first, as far as we know.
And we know who, do we?
Yes.
A sort of 17th century chap.
Little earlier.
16th century chap. Well, it wouldn't be... Is that the right century?
Yes, we're doing awfully well.
It's a writer.
I'm going to give
You're
you...
not going to say it's Shakespeare. I couldn't bear it after all
I'm
that.
going to give you half a mark for getting the right century and all that. Now, it was a chap called Sands, S-A-N-D-Y-S. And in 1904, the paper The Spectator quoted Archbishop Whately as saying, "Honesty is the best policy, but he is not an honest man who is honest for this reason." So it has a sort of ironical connotation. Half a mark. Now, Dilys Powell, the origin of your quotation: "Full-blown poppies, overcharged with rain, decline the head and, drooping, kiss the plain."
It's somebody who wrote in verse,
Yes.
rather unsuccessfly, I should say.
Well, he made quite a good living at it.
Did he?
Oh, yes.
He? He.
Particularly for this work.
Can't have been Pope.
It is Pope.
Iliad. Pope made his money out of a
He ought to be
subscription copy of the Iliad.
Ashamed of himself.
It is Alexander Pope's translation of Homer's Iliad in his own particular kind of heroic couplets. Well, now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their improbable explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. And so back to Denis Norden and his line, "Honesty is the best policy."
Let me tell you how I first came to meet Nifty McGraw. I was working on an idea for a B picture, which I think had rather a novel twist. It was about a gangster who was owned by a syndicate of boxers. Well, in order to do some research on how criminals behave and think, I asked Wandsworth Prison if I could interview one of their customers, and they said, "Well, you come along next visiting day and take your choice." Well, when I got there, the first bloke I noticed was a rather doleful-looking little man with a very distraught wife the other side of the grill. And she was saying, "I'll be there when you come out, Nifty. We'll take up the threads of our life again. I'll wait for you. I swear I'll wait for you, Nifty." And he said, "God blimey, Alice, they only give me 7 days." Now, you may think that 7 days was rather a light sentence for a case of armed robbery, but what actually happened in the armed robbery was very typical of the man. Nifty was holding this chap up, and the chap pleaded with him, "Please, don't take my wallet. I've got all my money in it, all the rent money." And to which Nifty answered, "Look, mate, I'm just about fed up with hearing all these hard luck stories. You think you're the only one who got troubles? Look at me. I can't even afford to buy bullets for this gun." So you see what I mean about Nifty. They say that every criminal makes mistakes, but Nifty got this down to a science. What other criminal would half-inch a large colour TV set right under the eyes of the store detective, and as soon as he got it home, send away for the 1-year guarantee? He got the year all right. You see, Nifty's trouble is this fatal carelessness or impatience. I don't know what it is. He worked out an absolutely brilliant raid on the Piccadilly branch of Barclays Bank, and then right there, right inside the bank, while he was actually writing out the note to shove under the cashier's grill, he turns to the commissionaire and he says, "Is there a hyphen in the word hold up?" He spent that Christmas in Dartmoor. I tackled him about this flaw in his character, because when we got to know each other, he invited me home, and he showed me his little souvenirs. You see that on the wall? He said, "That's the first £1 I ever made." I said, "Why have you got it framed?" He said, "It's 1/4 inch too short." Now, you can't argue with a man like that, can you? I mean, what kind of a mastermind will make an obscene telephone call, then try and reverse the charge? You see, no wonder this Nifty McGraw has been living off national assistance for the last 2 decades. And when I said to him, "What can society do about a man like you?" he said, "Stop me before I strike again." I said to him, "Nifty, the way you strike, there is no criminal for whom the old saying is more true. Honesty is the least poverty."
I think that's a very sad story. We'll try Frank Muir next, and if you remember, his quotation was, "Full-blown poppies overcharged with rain, decline the head, and drooping, kiss the plain."
You'll never do it.
For the last 10 weeks, I have not been either looking or being myself. My friends have noticed this. Some of them have commented on the improvement. But in fact, I had been through a rather deep emotional experience. An experience of mixed emotions, really. Mixed emotions has been defined as watching your mother-in-law drive over a cliff in your new car. But perhaps in a more modern phraseology, it is the good news, bad news thing. My good news was that 10 weeks ago, my Afghan hound had 6 puppies, and now for the bad news, 10 weeks ago, my Afghan hound had 6 puppies. The bad and the good with this sort of thing go together, and it has been a traumatic experience. One thing about Afghan puppies is they grow visibly. Every breath they take is like sort of putting one foot on the foot pump. of a beach mattress. You can see them growing before your eyes. It's one of the sad facts of this so-called welfare state that you can't have puppies on the national health. Our vet came the third day. He didn't get out of the car because it was spitting with rain. He just shouted, "Kittens okay? Right." 2 guineas. He did ring up and say that if there's any emergency, they've got an ambulance they can send, 30 guineas. No wonder they go, "Puppy, puppy." When they were 8 weeks old, a couple of weeks ago, we decided to civilize our 6 puppies and bring them into the dining room in the evenings. This worked terribly well, and we saw how intelligent they could be. They also are very obedient. You've only got to just look at them, the boy particularly, and say, "Don't do that." And they just look at you. And the first time I looked at him, the oldest boy, I said, "Now that's wrong. That's wrong to sink your teeth into Daddy's ankle and draw blood. It is not good." And he just looked at me, and suddenly I saw a little sovereign on the floor below him. And the golden sovereign grew to saucer size, and it grew to plate size. He didn't move a muscle, he just stood there. The girls are different. The first time I ripped him out to the girl, she curtsied. The only difference is the curtsy you usually get up after bobbing. And there was the golden sovereign. It is now 10 weeks old, and all 6 are still unsold. And then the local paper, the Evening Mail, said, "We understand you've got some Afghan puppies. Can we send our photographer along and photograph you with them?" I thought, yes, people will see. Lovely things, lovely, standing there, these beautiful, huge, lovely, wild things. Super. So the photographer came along, and I've got them in a pen made of chicken wire around 3 apple trees on the grass. There's the photographer. I said, "Right, where do you want me?" He said, "With the dogs." I said, "Indeed, sir, of course," so delighted. And I leapt I almost leapt the wire. I missed by about an inch, crashed to the ground, and came to with these wild, mad dogs licking my face. And that is the photograph he took. And that is the photograph I got this morning, and they said, would I put a caption to it? Well, I thought the only thing to do is to put a caption, some line couplet from Homer. Something like the one Jack said, "Full-blown poppies overcharged with rain, decline the head and drooping kiss the plain." Well, it doesn't quite fit, but if we altered it a bit, because really, I've come to the conclusion that in spite of their surplus energy and their wickedness, they're really going to go up into rather nice dogs, because when I was lying there insensible, they did try to revive me with their little licks. So I thought I'd alter Homer a little and put as a caption, how do you think this will fit? "Full-grown puppies, overcharged and bad, decline the head and drooping kiss their dad."
Well, 20 quid or nearest offer, gratefully received. And by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Muir wins the contest of the stories, and he and Dilys Powell also win this entire contest. And that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason, and presented by the BBC.
Denis Norden, Dilys Powell and Frank Muir. And the first round tries to test their vocabularies, I want the meaning of the following words, and 2 marks each time. We begin with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is a Jacobus? Jacobus. Jacobus.
It's something to do with James.
Yes, well, something very much to do with James.
A James.
Which James?
A king.
Yes. We had several.
Several, well, a kine then, a sort of...
Yes.
Something a kine?
Yes.
Kine of James the something.
Yes, have a shot.
The first.
Well done. Absolutely right. It's the unofficial name of an English gold coin which was struck in the reign of James I, and it's simply the Latin for James, as Dilys spotted. Denis Norden, what is a fiddly? F-I-D-D-L-E-Y. A fiddly.
Well, these days, more and more things are becoming fiddly. Airmail letters, I always find, are fiddly if you open them.
It's a rather larger and more clumsy object altogether, Denis. I don't know if you're going to get it.
I don't, unless it's the front half of the diddly-dee.
Now, there you have me. I just wouldn't know. No, it's an iron framework round the opening of a stoke hole on a ship, a nautical term. Of course.
We need to know that,
Well,
don't we?
I think 1 for your fiddly. 1. Anne Scott James, what's the meaning of dimity? D-I-M-I-T-Y.
Oh, I think it's something Jane Austen might have worn or hung up her clothes. It's not for wearing, but either, I would have thought, just as you do now, fine cotton. You'd have often done in a small print, I think.
That was what I wanted. It is, in fact, dimity is a stout cotton fabric. It is woven with raised stripes and fancy...
It's what you call a long-haired dachshund puppy, whose full name is Pudendum of Littlehampton. What isn't it?
No, I should feed him up.
Plump, it means plump.
That's what I want.
Means what?
Plump.
Plump.
What does it mean? I can't think. I think it does. Try plump.
Oh, it means plump.
That's it. Absolutely right. 2 marks. It's the same root as foot and touch and hot and pudzy. All the same type. Before we begin the next round, I'm going to read out a quotation for each team to write down. And the 2 women members will, I think, go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme, I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "Fine fellows cling to our legends, sir." And then in the last round, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Well, now I want to know who the following were, and again, 2 marks. Dilys Powell, who was Grip, G-R-I-P?
Grip was somebody's dog.
No.
No? He was somebody's raven.
Yes, do you remember which?
He was Barnaby Rudge. Barnaby Rudge is raven.
In?
In Barnaby Rudge.
By
Dickens.
2 marks. Denis Norden, who were Gargantua and Pantagruel?
Well, they were characters in 2 books by Rabelais.
Yes. Do you remember which was which?
Well, yes, they were father and son.
Yes,
right?
well done. 2 marks
He
again.
raped his nurse at the age of...
Francois Rabelais wrote Pantagruel in 1532 and Gargantua in 1534, which was the wrong order, because Gargantua was a good-natured giant and Pantagruel was his son by Bardivec. He was always very thirsty. Anne Scott James, who was Captain Nemo or Nemo?
He was Jules Verne. I mean, he was in a novel by Jules Verne.
What did he do?
What did he do?
We had the submarine.
Thousands and thousands of leagues under the sea.
Yes.
True it is. He's the hero of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, in which Jules Verne anticipated the development of the submarine.
Nautilus, wasn't it?
That's right, Nautilus, quite right, by about 100 years. Frank Muir, who was Mrs. Thrale?
Mrs. Thrale? Mrs. Thrale, who lived in the latter half of the 18th century, was shortish, stoutish, quite intelligent but not intellectual, probably hyperthyroid. She was married to a brewer called Thrale, and she lived in Streatham, a place called Streatham Park. Mr. Thrale, when he died, sold his brewery to his manager, whose name was Berkeley. And Mr. Berkeley and Mr. Perkins carried on the brewery together, which you used to be able to see, I don't know whether you still can, when you went on the train to Victoria, the Berkeley Perkins brewery. And Berkeley Perkins beer used to have on its label a picture of Dr. Johnson. And the point of that was that Mrs. Thrale was a bit of a lionizer in the 18th century, and she was hostess to Dr. Johnson. And Dr. Johnson spent some of his happiest domestic hours with the Thrales in Streatham. And then when Thrale died, she married a Roman Catholic singer called Piozzi, which upset Dr. Johnson very much indeed.
It's extremely hard to catch Frank out on the 18th century, so I won't attempt to add to what he's said, which is absolutely accurate. Well done. Well, now a quickie round about dress or clothing, 2 marks again. Dilys Powell, what are or were weepers? W-E-E-P-E-R-S, weepers.
It's a form of widow's weeds, I should
Yes,
think.
it's part of it.
Widow's weeds.
It's a particular bit.
The bit you wore over your head, I should think.
No.
The fringe.
The fringe.
No, it's a nice thought, but it isn't quite. And in the singular, I mean, Frank may get this, if I suppose it's the or a weeper instead of weepers. It's,
A weeper.
It's also connected with funerals, but it is a bit different.
Oh,
Frank might wear it this time.
you could wear it, darling.
Oh.
Come on, show
Is it a sort of thing around the hat?
Yes, that's right.
Which, a band which
That's it.
which droops. Just like that.
Gunter.
I think you'll get it too. Weepers in the plural were the white cuffs on a widow's black dress, but weeper in the singular was the crepe hat sash worn on men's top hats at funerals. Now, Denis Norden, what are or were antigropelos? A-N-T-I-G-R-O-P-E-L-O-S. Antigropelos.
Antigropelos would be kind of armour plating that ladies wear during the rush hour underground. There's something that protected you, obviously, from gropelos.
That's right, yes.
They're Greek galoshes.
Well, you're almost right. 1.5. They're almost dead right. Not quite right, but near enough. They were waterproof leggings. And it's probably a corruption of antigropelos, which means against wet and mud. And it's all from the Greek. You get 1.5. Anne Scott James. Anne Scott James. What is a shako? S-H-A-K-O, shako.
Oh, that's some tremendous hat
What kind?
of a fur-like and nature, rather sort of deep in the crown, and of a Balkan origin.
Well, they're one of those chaps where when they have something that comes only over one
That's
shoulder
right.
and they put one, leg up on the
right.
chair and they
Piece
raise
of
a
braid,
glass.
piece
And
of braid stuff.
Hussars, yes.
yes, that's it. Yes, I must rejoin my regiment tomorrow. Tonight is ours, you know.
Well, you've missed out 2 bits of it, so I'll give you 1.5 again. It's a kind of military hat, more or less cylindrical. Therefore, it was a high hat, as Anna said, but it had a peak, and it had an upright plume or tuft. That's the bit you missed out. It's a Magyar, Hungarian word. Frank Muir, what is a pea jacket?
It's an overcoat. It's a sort of nautical overcoat, which is short enough to enable the wearer to to go about his duties without being unnecessarily constricted.
That's a beautiful description. You get your 2 marks. It's a... Well, now we come to the last round, and I go back to the 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation, which was, fine feathers make fine birds?
Well, I've been studying it like mad, and all I come to the conclusion is that it's a proverb.
Yes, we'll have a shot at the earliest chap who might have done it.
What, worn feathers?
Talked about
about the feathers.
war feathers. Talked about animals.
Talked about animals.
Easy.
Oh, Aesop.
Yes. First found in Aesop, though I think he turned it inside out. It's not only fine feathers that make fine birds, and then it comes in various books of proverbs from then onwards. It's a well-known proverb. Now, Anne Scott James, the origin of yours, which was, let us cling to our legends, sir.
I haven't the slightest idea, except everything was Sir, and is usually Dr. Johnson.
Later.
No, I can't do it. I'll pack it in.
No, it's Harley Granville Barker in a play called The Madras House. He also wrote The Voysey Inheritance. Let us cling to our legends, sir. They are the spiritual side of facts. Can't give any marks there. Now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their improbable explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir and to his quotation, fine feathers make fine birds.
I want to speak this evening a few words of encouragement to those of you listening, particularly the men who are thinking of growing a beard. Beards are worn by men, goats, sporans, oysters, and some lilies. Not all lilies. I mean, Lily Langtry didn't. Beards have figured, of course, largely in history. Sir Francis Drake had a beard, and you recall when he laid siege to the Spanish fleet in the Bay of Cadiz. All the newsprint of the time said that he was singeing the King of Spain's beard. This was actually a misprint. It should have said he was singing the King of Spain's beard, because the King of Spain's beard was a popular song of that time, which went, as I recall, the King of Spain's beard is extraordinarily weird. The Queen would like to kill the Barber of Seville. But there's beards figured in law about that period because the Earl of Surrey was having his beard and moustache trimmed by a barber just off Fleet Street when a patron nudged the barber's elbow and the Earl of Surrey was suddenly semi-detached. And he brought a suit against the barber for damages, and the Lord Chancellor, who was then Lord McAdoo, ruled that it wasn't the barber's fault at all, but in cases like that, the responsibility was entirely with the chap who did the nudge. And this ruling, which was called McAdoo about nudging, went into Hollin's Head Chronicles, and Shakespeare, in fact, wrote a play, taking that as a title. Can anybody remember the name of the Shakespeare play? It was Julius Caesar. The 19th century, of course, saw the flowering of beards, particularly in sport, with W.G. Grace, with his huge beard. And there was another cricketer, a friend of his, who was also noted in verse at the time, the Ancient Mariner, who had a long grey beard and glittering eye. But he was not nearly as good a batsman as W.G. Grace, as you remember, because he stoppeth one of three. Nowadays, when you're setting out to grow your beard, do sort of concentrate on the job. You know, it won't just come. You've got to really sort of think about it. The finest possible way of growing a beard, in fact, is to take yourself to bed for 2 or 3 weeks. Now, I know this. I got pneumonia about 7 years ago and was 4 weeks in bed, and I had this luxuriant... I was Delilah'd later by my wife, but I had this... it's something to do with that you're lying back there with a high old temperature, with a rare old temperature, and you're steaming like a Christmas pudding and seeing faces in the wallpaper, and the beard just sort of sprouts forth. So the thing to do, and this has happened throughout history, is to get a fever so that you have to go to bed, and then the beard will sprout out, and nobody can stop you growing it. There is, in fact, an old proverb about this. How does it go? Oh, yes.
Fine fevers make fine beards.
We shall never know which of the 3 or 4 types Frank's beard was, and I'm sorry about that. Now we go on to Denis Norden. If you remember, his quotation was, "Let us cling to our legends, sir."
Did you notice something very unusual about Frank's story this week? It wasn't about his Afghan hounds. Now, I hope you'll take that observation in the spirit in which it was intended, offensive, or no, really, let's say, jealous, dead jealous. Because you see, those hounds, those great lolloping beasts of his, they give him an enormous advantage on this program. 3 weeks out of 4, their lovable antics provide him with a ready-made, first-class story for my word. You see, whereas me, all I've got to base stories on is whatever colourful incidents crop up in my personal sex life. Which means 3 weeks out of 4, I haven't got anything to talk about. Now, the obvious answer to that situation, you may say, is, why haven't you bought a dog yourself? Well, quite frankly, I'm not what you call a doggy person. Oh, I'll pat a dog, providing he's high up enough. But the relationship that I have with most dogs is not an easy one, ever. Dogs, how can I put it? I can't seem to get through to dogs. I always remember arriving in an aunt of mine's garden one day, and there to greet me was this rather supercilious Labrador who just sort of stared at me, which started to make me uneasy. So I said, "Hello, doggy." "Hello, will you take me to your mistress?" You know what he did? He led me to another dog. Be that as it may, and however, things finally did get to a point where I felt I had to counter this advantage that Frank has over me in this particular panel game. So a few months back, willy-nilly, very much loath, I betook myself to Crufts. I don't know if you know about Crufts, but quite apart from those stalls which sell unnatural things like elevator shoes for dachshunds, you do tend to, well, I did tend to react rather negatively when a little bald man points to a dog and says, "That's Count de Vere Maximilian Sardonicus Emperor Changai III, and my name's Bert Wilkins." And nor do the Crufts type people themselves warm to you if you explain to them that you're only buying a resident animal in order to obtain ready-made anecdotes for a weekly radio program. What they tend to fob you off with is the dog that I got. He was an old English sheepdog, actually, Slobbo. That's his name. One wipe of his mouth and you can stick 2,000 trading stamps in the book. As for his character, well, he manages to be both dead windy and viciously ferocious. And that is the problem. It's the problem with Slobbo. The one thing that the obedience school did teach him before he was expelled, the persistent refusal to pay attention, one thing they did teach him was how to be a watchdog. He will now definitely not allow into the house anybody he in any way distrusts. And that includes the people who live there. Now you realize what this situation means. Whenever we go out,
we have to take him with us. Otherwise, we can't get back in again. Which is why, when our phone went wrong the other night, I had to take him along with me to the phone box that was just on the corner. And as it was raining hard at the time, like a fool, completely brainwashed as I've now become by these 3 weeks out of 4 injunctions of Frank's about you've got to be nice to animals, I took Slobbo into the phone box with me. Now, you know the way English phone boxes are designed. At the best of times, you have to sort of fumble a bit to get out of them again. But when there's an absolutely brainless but completely full-grown old English sheepdog in there with you, 2 hours, 20 minutes. Wedged right across he was. And the more I pushed him, the more I clambered over him, and then he clambered over me, the more addled he got. And the more addled he got, the more insecure he got, until finally I screamed at him, "Heel, Slobbo. For heaven's sake, heel." And that's where he bit me. Right on the heel. So next week, folks, it's back to sex. It may not win what Jack always calls the longer volume of applause, but at least it doesn't get a chunk taken out of the end of your leg. Or as Granville Barker so rightly said, let us cling to our leg ends.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Denis Norden wins the contest of the 2 stories, but nevertheless, the other team, Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, win the entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
My Music.
The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott Jones, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. And here's round 1 to test their respective vocabularies. 2 marks if you can tell me the meaning of these words. We begin with Anne Scott James. And what does frangipane or frangipani mean?
Well, it's a plant.
Yes?
It's a tree which is covered with glorious and brilliant blossoms.
Yes?
And you see it in, the Middle East, see it in India, see it in the Caribbean, etc., etc.
What do you make from it, Anne?
What do you make from it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, flowery wreaths.
You could, I suppose.
Cut flower arrangements. Very good for flower arrangements in black vases.
I'm bound to give you your 2 marks. It wasn't all the answer I wanted, but you were accurate. It's the red jasmine tree, but it's normally used of the perfume which it's prepared from, or which imitates the smell of the red jasmine flower. And it comes from a chap who was called Monsieur Frangipane. This seems rather odd. 2. Frank Muir, what's the meaning of disembogue? Disem and then B-O-G-U-E. Disembogue.
It's the opposite of embogue.
Yes.
Well, embus is to get in a bus. It means, will you kindly leave the lavatory?
You're not all that far wrong. If you stick to sort of watery metaphors, you might get there.
It's a movement of water.
Yes.
To disembogue.
Yes.
They waters are disemboguing.
That's it. Have a shot at what you think they might be doing. Absolutely right.
I would have thought they're leaping over a sandbar.
Yes, they might be doing that. It means to pour forth at the mouth of a river or to flow into something, for instance, into the sea, or it can mean, figuratively, to pour forth like a crowd or a speech. Now, Dilys Powell, what is a lapicide? Lapicide. Lapicide.
Lapis, a stone.
Yes.
And a side is a sort of killer or chopper.
Yes. So this
a stone chopper. Would that be it?
Near enough.
Not very near.
One who cuts stones, or could be one who cuts an inscription on a stone. Same again. Latin, lapis stone, kaidery to cut or kill. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what is or was a bum bailiff?
Well, it was the chap who came round when you were evicted. Well, there was a famous comedy where Sidney Howard appeared in which he said, "Here I am and here I stay until I get what I came for." Do you remember that, Dilys? Very early comedy, all about one. Why it's called I think it's called a bum bailiff because it was for people who got a little behind with their rent. That's jovial, isn't it?
That's very good. I give you 1.5. It isn't quite right, but you've got the bailiff bit right. It's a bailiff of the meanest kind, one that is employed in arrests, according to Dr. Johnson, and because he was called bum bailiff, because to make his arrest he had to tap you on the back, and that's why it was bum bailiff. 1.5. Well, before we begin the next round, I'm going to read out a quotation for each team to write down, and I hope the 2 women members will go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the programme I shall ask them where they come from. Anne Scott James and Denis, yours is only connect. Only connect. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is the son and heir of a mongrel bitch. And then in the last round, I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. And now, a round of origins and derivations. What I want is 2 things. First of all, the present meaning of this particular set of words or expressions, but also how they came to have that meaning, how the expression originated. 2 marks for correct answers. Anne Scott James, mind your P's and Q's.
Well, it means now be very meticulous and careful and don't tread on people's toes or make mistakes or generally muck things up.
Yes.
Now, it must come from some language, mustn't it?
Yes.
What language is important to get your P's and Q's right? Oh, you think
any
printing,
language,
do you?
I should think, yeah. Because,
is it anything to do with typesetting?
if you want a pint and you ask for a quint,
yes,
you wouldn't
get what you want.
So practically any language.
That's good enough. If you stick to your pub and you're there. Next measure up from a pint.
A quart?
A quart!
I thought it was printing.
It is as well. You'll get to that. The 2 most likely explanations are that it was a warning to either to children learning the alphabet or to printers, apprentices who were sorting out type, to be pretty careful to distinguish between the letters which had long tails, which were P's and Q's. But also in old-time pubs, in the accounts scored up in chalk, a quart was a Q and a pint was just a P, and therefore the customer had to watch pretty carefully and see he wasn't being cheated. 2 marks. Frank Muir, 3 sheets in the wind.
Well, it means a little bit spiffled. It means drunk.
Yes, and how does it come to have that meaning?
Nautical. Sheets are the ropes that tie, that go from a sail to the man's hand who's handling the sail. 3 sheets in the wind means that instead of being in his hand, they're in the wind.
Yes. What happens then to the ship or boat?
Not a good thing, Jack. Not a good thing at all. No, they would yaw.
Yes,
they would yaw.
That's what I wanted. 2 marks. It means
what's yours, and you say mine's a pint. Mine's your pint and quart.
Frank's quite right. It means very drunk, just about as drunk as you can be. And if you let go on a ship which has 3 sails, the 3 sheets, then the ship itself starts yawing or behaving in a very drunken manner, and you can't control it at all. So 3 sheets in the wind. Dilys Powell, to win hands down.
Win hands down means to win very easily.
And why?
Because your opponent isn't much good.
But what are you doing with your hands?
You're riding a horse, and you're so good that you answer rushing forward with him. You've got your hands on his neck.
Yeah. It means to win without the slightest difficulty. If a jockey wins with his hands down, it shows he hasn't had to bother himself much. The race was something of a walkover, and Dilys is quite right there. Denis Norden, to eat humble pie.
Well, today it generally means to having to apologise abjectly.
Yes.
For something that you've been rather arrogant about. Now I do know where this comes from. Yes, humble was the offal that used to be served at sort of medieval feasts only to the oiks at one end of the table, while all the nobility were eating sort of scampi and stuff up the other end. So therefore, if you ate the humble or offal, you were lowly and abject.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Dennis. 2 marks. The Lord and his household, after you'd killed a deer, they'd dine on the proper venison, but as Dennis says, the hunt followers and servants had things like the heart and liver and entrails and made into a great pie called Umball's pie. 2 marks. There are certain English words that are spelt alike but have sharply differing meanings, and they don't always, of course, come from the same grammatical root. For 2 marks, can you give me 3 different meanings for each of the following words? Beginning with Anne Scott James. And gammon.
Well, to start with, it means a nice bit of bacon.
Yes, that's a good start.
Which you can either have with parsley sauce or with a sherry sauce or with new potatoes or broad beans, don't you think?
Well, there's 3 different types of gammon.
Yes, 3 different types of gammon. Well, it means nonsense.
Yes, that's
gammon,
true.
as in gammon and spinach.
That's 2 out of 3. Yeah, there's a game.
Backgammon. But that's one
yes, that's right.
word, isn't it?
Yep. Now, I think I helped a little much then. 1.5 anyway.
You did?
It is the bottom piece of a flitch of bacon, including, I think, the hind leg. It's a kind of victory at backgammon in which the winner gets double stakes and a verb of the same kind. It also, as Anne quite rightly says, means humbug or nonsense, and to talk in that way. And finally, a nautical one, which Frank probably knows, to lash a ship's bowsprit to the stern and the lashing itself. Frank Muir, chase, just C-H-A-S-E, chase.
No problem. Chase means to dash smartly after.
Yes.
The verb. Or it means an area in which things four-legged append in order that people may dash after them.
Yes, well done.
As in Cheviot chase and so forth. It means there's a printing thing.
Yes, there is. 2 marks splendidly. I think nothing you've left out except that it is also part of a gun enclosing the bore or a groove cut in a wall to take something which looks like a gun barrel, a pipe, for instance. And it is also the result of a stroke in real tennis as opposed to lawn tennis. 2 marks it is. Well, now, Dilys Powell, your word is maroon. M-A-R-O-O-N, maroon.
Well, it's a colour.
Yes.
It's also a form of warning. You let off a maroon to say there's a disaster impending.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Maroon.
And one of
and to be isolated.
Yes, I'll do. 2 marks it is. Maroon is brownish crimson colour, claret-coloured. It's a firework filled with gunpowder and making a very loud noise. It is to put somebody ashore and leave him on a desolate island or a coast as a punishment. It's also a Negro descended from fugitive slaves living in the mountains of Dutch Guiana and the West Indies, and it can be, as in French marron, the sweet chestnut. 2 marks. Denis Norden, hobby.
Hobby. Well, it's first any kind of undertaking that you pursue simply for the pleasure of it.
Yes.
I don't know whether hobby horse is the same word
yes.
or not. I tell you what else it is. You remember that marvellous Quatermass serial?
Yes.
Well, the thing started in Hobby Lane, and they explained that hobby was the old name for hobgoblin, which was an evil spirit of some kind, and they said that hobby was an evil spirit.
I think, yes, I didn't know that, but I'll take that. 2 marks.
What do I Can I say it? I think that's right. We should probably hear from people if it isn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, so don't worry about it.
The thing from which the hobby horse, the children's toy, was made, it was just a small or middle-sized horse, a kind of pony. It is also a kind of falcon, which was used to hunt very small birds like larks. And it was also an early type of velocipede, a forerunner to the bicycle. But you get your two. Well, now we come to the last round, and I go back to those quotations I gave the two teams earlier in the programme. 2 marks again. And Scott James, I'd like the origin of your quotation. Only connect.
I think it's Howard's End.
By
E.M. Forster.
Good enough. It's the motto or epigraph of E.M. Forster's novel Howard's End, written, as far as I remember, around about 1912. Now, Dilys Powell, I'd like the origin of your quotation. The son and heir of a mongrel bitch.
Mongrel bitch. Could it be Shakespeare?
Yes, it is Shakespeare. Have a shot at the play. Somebody, pretty...
Hamlet?
You're not very far wrong. That's
a tragedy.
It's a tragedy, yes.
I don't know. No, I really don't.
All right, 1 out of 2. It's Shakespeare, King Lear, Act 2, Scene 2. It's part of a terrific tirade by Kent against Goneril's very prissy steward, Oswald, who's called all sorts of other things, too. 1 out of 2. Well, now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their improbable explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back we go to Denis Norden and his quotation, Only Connect.
Somebody once told me about an English lit exam where 2 students were asked the question, what is poetry? And one student wrote, poetry is the transcendental metaphor by which the human spirit imposes on the finite an oblique apprehension of the infinite. And the other student wrote, poetry is writing where all the lines begin with a capital letter. Now, that particular phenomenon, the way that the same thing can impinge on different minds in 2 completely different ways, that was brought home to me again recently when I was reading a book called Corporation Man by Anthony Jay. Now, what the book is about is how people in large corporations function. But what astonished me about it was that it's based on what Anthony Jay remembers about working inside the British Broadcasting Corporation. Because, you see, I was working there at exactly the same time. But do you know the only thing that I remember about being a corporation man? The office collections. Now, I don't know whether this ritual takes place in all large corporations, but at the BBC TV Centre, not once, but at least twice or 3 times every single day, there'd be a knock on your office door, and in would come this girl with a collecting box. Now, I'm not certain whether it was always the same girl, but it was always the same looking girl. Do you know what I mean? One of those neat, well-meaning kind of faces that always goes with fat legs. And she'd say, excuse me, I hope I'm not interrupting, but Penny Sanderson's having a baby. I said, well, if you need hot water, wouldn't the canteen... The following week, just as you're in the middle of an important telephone call, who puts her head round the door but Miss Fatlegs again? Would you like to see what we bought for Penny? Can you hold on a moment, New York? I have to look at a matinee jacket. Now, this ritual isn't limited just to fertility. The box comes round equally promptly for birthdays, engagements, weddings, silver weddings, and any form of minor surgical work. And the case that I'll never forget was when an accountancy clerk one day on the 12th floor, he went suddenly demented, climbed out the window and poised himself on the ledge. Well, you should have seen the excitement at the BBC. There were police there, and firemen, and a priest, and even the director of personnel himself pleading, please don't jump, it'll ruin the holiday roster. But you know, the only thing that finally brought this accountancy bloke inside, just as he gathered himself to jump, the window next to his slid upwards and an arm poked out with a collecting box on the end, and this voice, before you go, Mr. Baxter, will you give a little towards Sandra Williamson? She's going in to have her nose done again. So now do you see what I mean by two minds recalling the same situation in two completely different ways? You see, to Mr. Anthony Jay's elegant mind, the corporation's activities broadened out into all different forms of territorial imperatives. To my penny-pinching recollection, they just narrowed down to one imperative, that one of E.M. Forster's, only collect.
We'll have a whip round for Denis at the end of the programme. And now we go on to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his quotation was, the son and heir of a mongrel bitch.
My story is just a personal experience that happened to me when I was on holiday in Corsica. It's a rather sad story. Not funny. It concerns mongrel bitches, or at least, I don't know, it could have been a mongrel bitch or a mongrel dog. I won't stand out against mongrel bitches as against mongrel dog. The only thing, if it's mongrel bitch as against mongrel dog, is a bucket of cold water. This was... the dogs... But they were mongrel dogs on this stretch of sand where I went swimming. I went swimming alone. There were other people on the beach, but I wasn't with my wife. And the sun had come out very strongly, and I took my I had my swimming costume on underneath, and I took my trousers off and I folded them very carefully and put them on the beach, and I swam out to a rock, which was about 40 yards out. Most chaps' bathing costumes, ladies, I don't know whether you know, have a sort of drawstring. It's a sort of safety measure, which you knot tightly, you see, when you're swimming. So I undid the knot, you see, and lay back, much more comfortable. And then I thought I'd dive in, and I swam briskly for the shore, 4 strokes fast crawl, 6 minutes rest, get the breath back. So, and I got out of the water. And then there were sort of 2 noises hit me. There was a rather elderly lady sort of screamed, and a rather young, brassy lady who looked as though she was married to a Nîmes garage proprietor and went in for wife swapping. She laughed. And then I realised that I hadn't got my shorts on. That in the diving off the rock, I'd lost my swimming shorts, and I was in fact naked. So once I went back into the water, took to the water, where I was safe. I thought, well, look, I'll wait and just make a quick dash for my trousers. It was then I suddenly saw this pack of mongrel dogs descend on the beach. Now, that morning, I'd carried in the trouser pockets a camembert cheese, and they'd obviously smelt that because they fell upon my trousers, and they rent them. They rent them in twain, and this pack of mongrels disappeared in 2 little packs, both massaging one leg of my trowel, a trowel each. They went out, and I stayed in the water from 4:15 until 7:15. And my skin was going all white and crinkly, like an apple pie just before it goes in the oven. And I was really feeling terribly cold, but the people left the beach. So I crept out. Nothing to hide my nakedness. Nothing. I stumbled across to a little sort of grassy bit, looking for something to hide myself, a sheet of Paris Match, anything. And there my luck was in. There was a sort of galvanized iron bucket, a sort of wide bucket, sort of bath affair, old and rusty. But I grabbed it up by the handles, clapped it over my salient features, and made my way up towards the village. And I had to slide along a wall to our house, and opposite the wall was the village inn. And there in front of it was all the village sitting watching a game of boule. You know, the funny game they play with heavy iron cannonballs. As I got to the end, the woman, a neighbour of ours, Madame Ferrari, suddenly looked at me, and I looked at her, and I said, bonsoir, bon appétit. And she said, Monsieur, we know what you are thinking. And I said, what? She said, you are thinking there is a bottom in that bath. So I just want to say that if you go to seek the sunshine and the fresh air and the golden sands of Corsica, do avoid, as Shakespeare said, the sun and air of a mongrel beach.
Desperate places Frank does stay in. Well, ladies and gentlemen, by your vote, Frank Muir, in fact, wins the contest of the two stories, but nevertheless the other team, Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, win the entire competition, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The programme was devised by Tony Schreien and Edward J. Mason, and presented by the BBC. Presents My Word. And here to introduce the program and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Denis Norden, Dilys Powell, and Frank Muir. And now we come to round one, test their vocabulary for them. I'd like to know the meaning of the following words, 2 marks each time. Dilys Powell, what does pinfold mean? P-I-N-F-O-L-D. Pinfold.
Pinfold?
Yes.
Pin. You pin in.
Yes, you can. What would you pin?
Pin in a fold. Pin a fold in.
You're getting very close.
I'm getting close. Pin them in.
Yes. And what do you normally pin in?
Sheep. Sheep? Sheep?
That'll do. It's an enclosure, a pinfold, or a pound for stray or distrained cattle, sheep, and you can make it a verb to confine cattle in this particular way. 2 marks. Denis Norden, what's the meaning of Hotchkiss?
Hotchkiss. There was a famous character, I believe, in Itmar, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
Called Hotchkiss. And it's also a gun of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Have a shot at which kind?
Used on the frontier, on the northwest frontier, was it?
Yes, I think it would have been.
You don't really know, though, do you? I recognise. We recognise
You are
Chairman's tone.
Well, surely gun's good enough, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a sort of. I don't know anything about guns. I think it's a kind of machine gun.
That's what I wanted. 2 marks. Kind of machine gun named after its inventor. And there was, I think, also a Hotchkiss rifle as well. That's why I was a bit uncertain about the Northwest Frontier, because I think they may have used it before there were machine guns at all. Anne Scott James, what's the meaning of jalousie? J-A-L-O-U-S-I-E.
It's French for jealousy.
Yes, but it means something else. A contrivance.
Is it one of those pieces of furniture where you sit back to back, you know, serpentine, the opposite to a love seat?
I thought, I know love seat, but I didn't know
love
this
seat,
one.
you sit side by side,
Yes.
and there's a sort of circular kind where you sit back to back.
No, I don't think you're not sitting at all. It's a nice
There's
idea.
something in decoration.
It's a window, isn't it? A window of some kind.
Kind of a window.
It's either a window or the sort of screen that goes over a window.
The screen which which your lover, your husband peeps through when your lover, when one's lover is with one in the room.
Brilliant description, Anne, and 2 marks. It's a blind or a shutter made with slats that slope upward from outside so as to keep out the sun and the rain, but to admit air and some light. And I think Anne's explanation about the jealousy was absolutely right. 2 marks.
To admit air and a lover.
Frank Muir, what does larup mean? L-A-R-R-U-P. Can be larop, but larup is more usual.
If it's la rope, it's French for the cord, which holds the jealousy, and you lower it up and down. If it's larrup, it's a larruping, isn't it?
Yes.
Good. A verb, to larrup, which means to hit out savagely with a stockwhip at.
Absolutely right. 2 marks. It's very obscure in origin, this word, but it does mean to thrash or to flog. It may come from an old Dutch word. Before we begin the next round, I'm going to read out a quotation for each team to write down, and the 2 women members will go on studying those quotations, because at the end of the program, I shall ask them where the quotations come from. Denis Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "One good turn deserves another." And Anne, Scott, James, and Dennis, yours is, "The 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to." And then in the last round, I shall ask Frank and Dennis to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Now round about the author of the week. What I want is to have the author identified. I shall then ask some more questions about the author and works. 2 marks. And here's a quotation for identification purposes. "Pray, my dear," quoth my mother, "have you not forgot to wind up the clock?" "Good God," cried my father, making an exclamation, but taking care to moderate his voice at the same time. "Did ever woman, since the creation of the world, interrupt a man with such a silly question?" Dilys Powell, who is the author, and in which book do you find the quotation?
Well, a tiny but very useful voice in my ear suggests that it might be Sterne.
Yes, and the book?
And it might be Tristram Shandy.
Well done. It's Lawrence...
Not me.
It's book 1, chapter 1 of Lawrence Sterne's Tristram Shandy, which appeared in 9 volumes over a period 1759-1767, and it was spoken at the moment of the begetting of Tristram Shandy himself. Now, Denis Norden, can you name any 4 characters in that novel?
Tristram Shandy.
Yes, good start. That's why I asked for 4.
Well, there's the mother and the father. And then, of course, my Uncle Toby.
Yes. Yes, you are absolutely right. You haven't cheated. Could you give me one more?
No.
I'm bound to give you your 2 marks. Tristram himself, his father was called Walter. There's Mrs. Shandy. I don't know her Christian name. I don't know anybody does. Corporal Trim, my Uncle Toby, Yorick, Dr. Slop, Widow Wobman, and 1 or 2 others. Very good gang. Now, Anne Scott James, what, according to my Uncle Toby, did our armies do terribly in Flanders?
Either well or badly, do you think?
No, they did something terribly.
Oh, they did something terribly. Drank terribly, fought terribly, ate terribly, made love terribly. Talking they were while they were doing it. Oh, swore terribly.
Yes, you've got that. Our armies swore terribly in Flanders. This was a typically inconsequential interjection by Uncle Toby, while Dr. Slop is pronouncing a great curse, which goes on for about 10 pages, against the servant in the book, Obadiah. 2 marks. Frank Muir, what was Uncle Toby's principal hobby or obsession, and what was the name of the house in the north where Sterne lived, and which has recently been restored?
Uncle Toby was wounded in a painful place, and his manservant, the corporal, was also wounded in a less painful place. No, equally painful but less private place. and their pleasure was to play war games, was to reconstitute the great battles using the bowling green.
Yes. Well done. And the house? Where's it lived?
I've got a picture of the house in my dining room over the sideboard, painted by my son. So I can tell you quite a lot about this if we've got the time. It was in a village called Coxwold in Yorkshire.
He called it?
He called it Shandy Hall.
That's exactly.
And if you're in Yorkshire, you must go and see it, because it's absolutely beautiful. It's a 14th century cottage with the 18th century interior. It's quite lovely.
Well done, Frank. 2 marks. Well, in this round, we talk about saints. Modern Europe is at least Christian in origin, and the names of saints abound. Many of these saints' names are associated now with something fairly different from that for which they were originally canonized. What are these associations of the following saints? 2 marks. Dilys Powell, Saint-Cyr, C-Y-R, Saint-Cyr.
Oh, that's a place in France where they train cavalry.
Absolutely right. Or Saint-Cyr-l'École. It's the famous French military academy just southwest of Paris. Napoleon moved it there from Fontainebleau into a building formerly occupied by a school.
Madame Maintenon.
That's right. That's right. School for the daughters of the nobility. Well done, Frank. 2 marks. Denis Norden, St. Gotthard. G-O-T-T-H-A-R-D.
He passes.
I was going to say he must be the only saint who's well known for making a pass. That's that tunnel between Switzerland and Italy.
Well done.
Oh, brilliant.
It's the Alpine Pass of St. Gotthard, or the tunnelled railway which avoids the pass, and between Switzerland and Italy, as Dennis quite rightly says. And Scott James, St. Cecilia.
That's a nasty one. Oh, yes, I think you've read a very famous convent of St. Cecilia.
There was also the what's that? Ode St. Cecilia's Day.
Yes.
She's music. Does your mother know your own? Wasn't something to do with music?
Yes.
And they have on St. Cecilia's Day, they have concerts everywhere.
That's right. Yes, she's the patron saint of music in general and of organ playing in particular, and you often see her in the stained glass windows bearing a diminutive church organ. St. Cecilia, 2 marks. Frank Muir, St. Lubbock's Day.
St. Lubbock. St. Lubbock.
It sounds like a terribly dreary church with yellow pine interior and hissing gaslights.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this mostly happens on Monday.
Happens on Monday? Happens on Monday?
Nothing.
St. Lubbock's Day.
Decent happens.
No, going back to school.
Nothing happens. This is the point.
Oh, nothing happens.
Oh,
shops are closed.
Yes, that's it.
Shops are closed. In
It's
France.
the day of closing shops on Monday.
Yes. And which day is that? It only happens on
Monday.
Wait a minute.
You're getting there.
Jack, if you want to help.
I helped an awful lot.
There's a kind of sort of
Easter Monday.
amiable
Yes,
non-help.
Easter
And what do you call Easter Monday?
Easter Monday.
What I call Easter Monday?
St. Lubbock's Day.
Yes. All right, yes,
I never
1.5. Sir John Lubbock invented bank holidays, and he got them sanctioned by Parliament in his Acts of 1871. So St. Lubbock's Day means any of these bank holidays for which we have particular cause to be grateful to Sir or St. John.
God rest his soul.
Now, this is a round of tools of the trade. With what occupation or profession do you associate the following? 2 marks again. Dilys Powell, sphygmomanometer. S-P-H-Y-G-M-O-M-A-N-O-M-E-T-E-R. Sphygmomanometer.
Medicine, I should think.
Yeah, do you know what it does?
Well, I think you measure the blood pressure.
You're absolutely right. Well done, Dilys. Denis Norden, tailings dam.
Tailings dam.
D-A-M.
D-A-M, yes, of course. Tailings dam, I would say, is a mild oath permitted to private detectives when shadowing somebody.
Lovely thought.
I don't know, who used
tailings and then has to have a dam. Farriers.
Farmer's wife.
Farriers. All the tails, when they're farrying, they fall in that kind of thing that they have on their laps.
You're on the right track, but it doesn't fur. It's another kind of residue. Can get closer.
It's something that has a residue when you deal with it. Would it be making those crossbars for the tops of old-fashioned lampposts?
No. Could be.
No,
it could have started with that. I think it comes from metalliferous mining. It's the receptacle into which the useless residue drains after they've taken the metal ore and separated it out. Tailings was the old name for inferior leavings or residue.
Yeah, anybody interested in careers for their children?
Now, Anne Scott James. Pointillism. Pointillism.
Well, it's a kind of painting.
Yes, it's a method rather than a tool. I would have said that. But what kind of method?
Well, where you make your effect or your picture with all sorts of little dots and spots.
Sura.
Such as Sura, would I suppose be the best known exponent.
Point about the dots.
The point about the dots?
Yeah.
Can you...
Were they all the same colour?
Well, no, these are coloured pictures, not black and white.
Yeah.
These are all done. They're a form of multicoloured painting.
Yes.
All right, too. It's in painting. Its method of producing light effects by crowding the surface of the painting with small spots of various colours, which then your eye blends together for you, unless you go and stick your nose absolutely straight against it. And Seurat was the first well-known French impressionist to use this. Frank Muir, couch.
I think it's a couch glass.
No. I'm talking about tools of the trade.
For consistent producers of B pictures.
Casting directors, yes.
You're strangely silent, Jack.
I think I'm
not the answer.
Just trying to think whether that would do. I think
Yes, it will.
Well, it could be physiatrist.
Yes, that's what I wanted.
Oh, big one.
Or psychiatrist.
That's right, psychiatrist or psychoanalyst. And I suppose there could be other professions, some of which Frank has already mentioned. Well, two it is. And now we come to the last round. And I go back to the quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. 2 marks again. Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? One good turn deserves another.
The proverb.
Yes, do you remember any particular book of Proverbs where you find it?
I've never read any books of Proverbs.
Well, I did write. It is a proverb. It's in a slightly different form. I think it first appears in English in Ray's book of Proverbs. One good turn begs another. Now, Anne Scott James, the origin of yours. 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to.
Well, it's in the to be or not to be speech in Hamlet.
Yep, 2 marks. Well, now I'm going to ask Frank and Dennis to give me their improbable explanations of how these quotations came into being. And for this round only, the marks will go to whichever unlikely story gets the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So, back to Frank Muir, and one good turn deserves another.
Yes. What was I going to tell you about? Oh, yes. Quite recently, the BBC shelled out something like 200 quid in order to give me my first glimpse of one of the most beautiful sights in the world. It was seeing the sun come up from an aircraft. That is the most... It's always been my ambition. I didn't quite make it, actually. It's always been my ambition to have seen that. And I suppose it was, a couple of years ago when I was 50, when I'd gone through half my life. And I made a little list of all the things I'd achieved. And all the things, childhood ambitions, which I'd always wanted to do and had failed to achieve. The sort of things that everybody wants to do. Like, I'd never ridden a Derby winner. I'd never put a kipper through a bishop's letterbox. Never had. I'd never sung Good King Wenceslas in Hebrew. And I had never seen the sunrise. Then the BBC said, go over and film a bit, and then jumbo. Only 3 days. Now, it was daylight going out, but coming back, it was a night flight. So what I had to do was to sleep soundly in New York, and I could stay awake on the night flight and see the sunrise in the morning. If you ever tried to sleep in New York, it's absolutely frightening. I bought some sleeping pills, which I don't normally take, and they were absolutely useless. I just read the instructions, and it said, I was lying in bed, and it said, take 1 hour before retiring. Well, I don't know, it's about 10 years before I'm even thinking of slowing down, giving it up. So the following day, I was staggering around, and then the producer of the program said, well, get the wax things, plugs. They're absolutely marvellous. Went to a chemist. Lovely little things they are. Little, rather large, actually, wax things sitting in cotton wool in a sweet little box. Absolutely hopeless. Did nothing for me, and were hell to swallow to begin with. It was a very sad Frank who got on that aircraft home. My eyelids were like sort of warm lead bottle tops. It required the use of the fingers to keep them open. I got on the plane at 10 at night. Settled down, jumbo. I missed I wasn't interested in watching the polo match or or anything like that. I wanted to really just sit in the seat and go to sleep by the window, facing the direction the sun's going to come up at dawn, you see. And I fought against sleep, but I went to sleep. But when I awoke, there in front of me was the most beautiful sight in the world. Dawn. It's marvellous. There's a kind of dark greyness which is suddenly suffused with a sort of pink which then goes redder. And I sat there and I thought, I've seen it. It didn't last very long. It soon came to an end. In fact, it said the end across it. And I realised I'd been watching the film which they throw on those aircraft. But it was so beautiful that next time I'm going to save up and go and not watch the film, but stay awake and actually see a real sunrise, because it is absolutely marvellous. It is worth every penny, every newpence that I hope the BBC will pay me to go over and see it again. As the proverb says, one good dawn deserves an airfare.
Now we pass on to Denis Norden's story, and if you remember, his quotation was, "the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to."
When the phone rings at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's never good news, is it? And sure enough, that morning, Mr. Norden, St. Albans Police Station here. Do you have a son who came here for the pop festival? I said, well, depends. What is he actually nicked for? If it's that girlfriend of his, you can never trust a history of art student, whatever she... He said, no, Mr. Norden, at this moment your son is stretched out on the floor of this station. I think you'd better get up here, sir. Well, you can imagine. As I whizzed up that M1, my mind was in a turmoil. Where did I go wrong with the boy? I kept asking myself. And that was the question I repeated to the police sergeant as I stood in that police station, gazing down at my son's recumbent form. Where did I go wrong? Well, so he said, from the time you took getting here, I should say round about Watford roundabout. No, sergeant. No, I said... No, if that boy is guilty, then I am guilty. His crime is my crime. He said, I reckon it is your crime. I said, what do you mean? He said, did you buy him that second-hand sleeping bag, sir? I said, what if I did? I wanted him to have everything that I never had. Same reason I sent him to Rodine for his schooling. What if I did buy him the sleeping bag? He said, that's why he was brought in here, sir. The zip's stuck. You can't get out. He stood and gently nudged the sleeping body with the toe of his boot. I gazed down at the gently snoring figure
of the last of the Norden line. He hadn't even had the sense to wake up. As I stood there, my mind performed an intricate mathematical calculation. One mother, one father, one midwife, one state-registered nurse, 8 babysitters, 14 kindergarten teachers, 3 general practitioners, 1 tonsil specialist, 1 orthodontic dentist, 32 public school teachers, 2 mathematics crammers, 3 tennis coaches. It had taken 57 people to produce this. I turned on my heel and walked out into the night. You hear a lot about the 1,000 natural shocks that the flesh is heir to. Isn't it time those who have only sons told the world about something much more important? The 1,000 unnatural shocks that the heir is flesh to.
Well, a very touching story. And I think by your vote, ladies and gentlemen, Denis Norden wins the contest of the stories, and he and his partner, Anne Scott James, also win this entire contest, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland, who also compiled the questions. The program was devised by Tony Schreien and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.